I still remember the tremble in his voice. "Grandma, please, don't go back home." At first, I thought he was joking. Children say strange things when they're scared or half dreaming, and little Jacob had always been a sensitive soul, the kind who cried when the evening news showed a wounded bird. But when I looked up from my teacup that night, I saw real fear in his eyes. His tiny hands clutched the hem of my cardigan as though he were trying to keep me from vanishing right there in the kitchen. The clock ticked above us, steady, calm, indifferent, while I tried to understand why my 8-year-old grandson was begging me not to return to the place I had lived for 37 years. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" I asked softly. "Did you have a bad dream?" He only shook his head, tears welling up. "It's not a dream," he whispered. "Mom said things she shouldn't have. Please, Grandma, just don't go back." That was the moment something inside me froze. My daughter, his mother, had always been the practical one. The one who handled bills, repairs, and difficult conversations. The one I leaned on after my husband died. But lately, something about her had changed. There was a tightness in her smile, an edge in her tone when she spoke to me. She'd been visiting less often, avoiding eye contact, cutting our calls short with polite excuses. And now, this. The rain outside started up again, soft at first, then harder, the kind that rattled against the windows like fingers tapping for attention. I could hear the wind dragging itself through the trees, the house sighing under its weight. I felt suddenly small, fragile, like the world was leaning in to listen. "Jacob," I said, kneeling so my face was level with his. "Did your mother tell you not to tell me something?" He bit his lip and nodded. The air in the kitchen thickened. I could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator and the uneven rhythm of my heartbeat. Something terrible was unraveling in front of me, and I didn't yet know what it was, only that it was coming from inside my own family. That night, long after Jacob had gone to bed, I sat awake by the window of my daughter's guest room, watching the porch light flicker in the wind. My suitcase was by the door, half-packed. I should have gone home the next morning. But his voice kept echoing in my mind. "Grandma, please don't go back home." And deep down, in a place I didn't want to name, I felt it too. The uneasy knowing that he was right. Something was waiting for me back there. Something my daughter didn't want me to find. When dawn came, it arrived grey and heavy, the kind of morning that makes you feel like the world hasn't quite decided to wake up yet. The rain had slowed to a mist, clinging to the window panes, blurring the outlines of the trees beyond the yard. I sat at the edge of the bed in the guest room, holding my mug between my palms, the tea long gone cold. It had been 3 weeks since I'd left my old house on Willow Lane, the house my late husband, George, and I built together in our first years of marriage. Every corner of that place carried our laughter, our arguments, our silence. It was home, in every sense of the word. But after my health scare in the spring, the mild stroke that left me shaky and forgetful for weeks, my daughter, Claire, insisted I come stay with her for a while. At the time, it made sense. She said she wanted to keep an eye on me. She said it wasn't safe for me to be alone. I believed her. She was my only child, my anchor in a world that had become smaller and quieter with age. But now, sitting in her neat suburban house, surrounded by furniture that all looked too new and too perfect, I realized I didn't feel safe here either. Claire came into the kitchen that morning dressed for work, her blonde hair pinned up neatly, her blazer sharp and pressed. "You're up early," she said, pouring herself coffee. Her tone was casual, but her eyes flickered the way they do when someone's already on edge. "I couldn't sleep," I said. "Jacob had a bad night." Her hand paused midair, the spoon clinking softly against her mug. "A bad night?" "He seemed frightened," I said carefully. "He told me not to go home." She froze for the briefest second, then let out a practiced laugh, light, dismissive. "You know how he is. He worries too much. Probably overheard something and misunderstood." What would he have overheard? Claire's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Oh, Mom. You know how kids are. Their imaginations run wild." But it wasn't just imagination. There had been something real in Jacob's trembling voice, the kind of fear that doesn't come from stories. After she left for work, the house fell silent again. I wandered through the rooms, my slippers making small sounds against the polished floor. Claire's house didn't smell like a home. It smelled like lemon cleaner and air freshener, like something scrubbed too often to keep the truth from showing. There were no family photos on the walls, only abstract art in muted tones. The only picture of Jacob and me was on a small shelf in the living room, tucked behind a vase. It was as if she'd placed it there out of obligation, not love. I found myself missing my own kitchen, the chipped blue tiles George had laid by hand, the smell of cinnamon and bread that lingered after baking days, the sound of birds in the morning. My house had been old and creaky, yes, but it was alive in a way this one wasn't. Still, I couldn't deny that something in me had changed since the stroke. I was slower, more easily confused. I misplaced words sometimes, forgot dates. I'd been trying to convince Claire that I was fine, strong enough to manage again, but she always found ways to change the subject. One afternoon, I caught her whispering on the phone in the laundry room. "No, she doesn't suspect anything yet," she said. My heart thudded. I stood frozen at the edge of the hallway. She still thinks it's temporary. Yes, just a few more weeks. When she hung up, I quietly stepped away before she saw me. I told myself it was probably nothing, maybe a work call, maybe about a client. But the unease stayed. The next few days passed in a strange rhythm. Jacob grew quieter, avoiding eye contact when his mother was in the room. Once, I caught him drawing something at the kitchen table, a picture of our old house, surrounded by scribbled storm clouds. "Why is it raining in your drawing?" I asked gently. He didn't look up. "Because it's sad," he said. "Why is it sad, sweetheart?" He pressed harder with his crayon until the paper nearly tore. "Because it's lonely now." My throat tightened. "Jacob, did your mom tell you something about my house?" He looked up then, eyes wide and wet. "She said you won't live there anymore. She said it's gone." "Gone?" I stared at him, trying to process the word. "Gone? What do you mean gone?" He bit his lip and shook his head. "She said not to tell you." That evening, when Claire came home, I asked her directly. "Claire," I said as she set down her purse, "what did you mean when you told Jacob my house was gone?" She blinked, caught off guard, then quickly recovered. "He must have misunderstood. He said you told him not to tell me something." "Mom, he's 8, she said, forcing a laugh. "You're really taking the things he says too seriously." But there was a flicker, a shadow across her face that told me she was lying. That night, I dreamed of Willow Lane. Of walking through the front door and finding the rooms stripped bare, walls hollow, echoes bouncing off emptiness. In the dream, I called out for George, but all I heard was the wind through broken windows. When I woke, my pillow was damp with tears. I decided that morning I needed to see it for myself. Whatever Claire was hiding, I couldn't ignore it anymore. "Claire," I said over breakfast, "I'd like to go home tomorrow." Her fork froze halfway to her mouth. "Mom, that's not a good idea. I just need to check on things. It's been weeks. The plants will be dead, the mail's piling up." "I already handled it," she interrupted quickly. "I had someone go by and clean up." "Don't worry about it." "You had someone go by?" My voice trembled. "Without telling me?" "Mom, please. You're still recovering. The stress isn't good for you." Her tone was calm but final, the way people talk to someone they've already decided can't make their own choices. That was when I realized something I hadn't wanted to admit. My daughter wasn't protecting me. She was hiding me. That afternoon, while she was at work, I found the spare keys she thought she'd hidden in the drawer behind the plastic wrap. I packed a small bag, called a taxi, and told the driver to take me to Willow Lane. The closer we got, the quieter I became. The fields looked the same, golden with late summer grass, the sky stretched wide and pale. But as we turned the last corner, my stomach dropped. From a distance, I could see it, my house, and something wasn't right. The front gate was gone. The big oak tree George had planted decades ago had been cut down to a stump. When the taxi stopped, I stepped out, heart hammering. The air smelled of sawdust and dust, raw, unsettled. And then I saw it fully. My house wasn't gone. But it was dying. Half of it stood under scaffolding, the paint stripped, the windows boarded up. A large sign stood on the lawn. Property under renovation, development project pending. Below it, in smaller print, was the name of a real estate firm, the same one where Claire worked. The world tilted. For a long time, I couldn't move. My hands shook as I traced the edge of the sign. My throat felt dry. Claire hadn't just been keeping me away for my safety. She had been erasing my home, the place where my memories, my life, my husband still lingered. And as I stood there, alone on the broken porch, I knew Jacob's fear hadn't come from imagination. He'd seen the truth before I had. The crunch of gravel beneath my shoes sounded foreign, almost disrespectful, as I walked toward what was once my home. The garden that George and I had tended for decades was gone, no roses, no ivy climbing the porch railings. Only churned earth and wooden beams scattered like bones. I reached for the doorknob, half expecting it to resist me, but it turned easily. The door creaked open, the familiar sound now hollow and wrong. Inside, the air smelled of plaster and fresh paint. Half the living room had been gutted. My floral curtains were gone. The framed photos that once lined the mantel, our wedding picture, Claire's graduation, Jacob's first birthday, had vanished. For a moment, I thought I'd entered a stranger's house. I took a shaky step forward, my cane tapping against the floor. The echo that came back wasn't just sound, it was absence. Every inch of this place had been rewritten. Mrs. Bennet. I turned sharply. A young man in a construction vest stood near the staircase, holding a clipboard. Yes. You shouldn't be here, he said. We were told the property owner's mother moved out months ago. His words hit me like a gust of cold air. The property owner. He hesitated, glancing down at his papers. Says here the house was transferred to Claire Morrison. That's your daughter, right? I felt the world narrow to a pinpoint. My knees weakened. Transferred? Yes, Signed over in August. I couldn't speak. The date burned in my mind, August. That was the month after my stroke, when I could barely hold a pen. I think there's been a mistake, I whispered. He frowned sympathetically. Maybe talk to your daughter, I just work here. I don't remember the ride back. Only that the driver kept glancing at me through the mirror, his brow furrowed with concern. I must have looked like a ghost. When we reached Claire's house, I didn't even wait for her to come home. I sat at the dining table, the transfer date echoing in my mind. August. I had been in the hospital then, barely conscious. The papers. The folder she brought that day, asking me to sign some insurance forms. She'd stood by my bedside, her smile soft, her voice kind. Just routine, Mom. You don't have to read them. I'll handle everything. Oh God. The realization came slow and cruel. She hadn't just taken care of me, she had taken everything. When Claire came home that evening, she looked startled to see me. Mom. How did you get here? I took a taxi, I said quietly. I went home. Her purse slipped slightly from her shoulder. You what? I saw the sign, I continued, my voice trembling. The construction. The papers. You sold our house. Mom. Don't lie to me, Claire. My voice cracked through the air, sharper than I'd heard it in years. That house was my life. Your father's memory. How could you? She dropped her keys on the counter and took a deep breath, as if she'd been preparing for this moment. You weren't supposed to find out yet. The calmness in her voice chilled me more than anger ever could. What did you do? I whispered. She exhaled. Mom, please. You weren't well. You couldn't live alone anymore. The house needed too much work. So you sold it? I cut in. Without telling me. Without even asking me. I didn't sell it. Not yet. I'm renovating it. I thought maybe once it's fixed up, we can. We. Or you. Her lips parted, then pressed into a thin line. The silence that followed said everything. You forged my signature, I said finally. The words trembled, but they were true. Did you even hesitate, Claire? Her eyes filled, but not with guilt, with frustration. You don't understand, Mom. I was drowning. Between work, Jacob, your hospital bills, I didn't know what else to do. You left everything falling apart. I had to make a choice. I laughed bitterly. A choice? You call stealing my home a choice? "It wasn't like that," she shouted. "I thought I was saving you. That house was a death trap. The stairs, the wiring, it wasn't safe." Safe? My voice cracked. It was mine. We stood there, both shaking. Years of unspoken resentment hung between us, her need to control, my stubbornness to hold on. "Finally," she said, quieter this time, "I did it for you." But I saw it then, not love in her eyes, but something harder, colder. Desperation, maybe. Ambition. She worked in real estate. She knew the property's worth had tripled in the past year. She didn't do it for me. She did it for herself. That night, I couldn't sleep. The walls of her house felt like a cage. I could hear Jacob crying faintly through the walls, small, muffled sobs that broke my heart. I wanted to go to him, to hold him, but I couldn't face him with this truth yet. Instead, I went downstairs and sat in the dark, watching the reflection of the streetlights shimmer across the kitchen counter. I thought of George. Of the promise we made to never let that house leave the family. "It's our roots," he used to say. "No matter where life takes us, that house will always be our anchor." And now, it was gone, not by strangers, but by my own blood. I tried to pray, but the words wouldn't come. The following days were filled with tension so thick you could taste it. Claire avoided me, leaving early for work, returning late. Jacob grew even quieter. Once, he slipped a folded paper into my hand while Claire wasn't looking. It was a crayon drawing the house again, but this time, it was surrounded by flames. Underneath, in shaky letters, he'd written, "Mom says it's better this way." My heart broke. That night, I asked him softly, "Jacob, why is she doing this?" He looked at me with eyes too old for his age. "Because she wants to forget," he said simply. "She says the house makes her remember bad things." Bad things? He hesitated, then whispered, "She cries when she sees Dad's pictures." It hit me then. The truth I'd missed all along. Claire wasn't just erasing my past. She was erasing hers. The next week was a blur of confrontation and quiet war. Claire avoided my questions. I began collecting proof: old bank statements, letters, documents I could still access. Every time I asked about the paperwork, she'd change the topic or grow defensive. But one afternoon, while she was out, I found what I needed. In the desk drawer of her home office, tucked under a folder labeled Client Transfers, was a copy of the property deed. My signature, shaky and uneven, sat at the bottom. The notary seal, dated August 14th. Next to it, a handwritten note in her script. Property cleared. Listing delayed pending renovation approval. I sank into the chair, the paper trembling in my hands. I could almost see myself that day, frail, medicated, trusting her completely. She must have guided my hand, assuring me it was insurance paperwork. I felt sick. That night, when she came home, I left the papers on the kitchen table. No words, no notes, just truth laid bare. When she saw them, her face went white. "Where did you? You used me," I said quietly. "You took advantage when I couldn't fight back." "Mom, please. I want the house back, Claire. Tomorrow. Undo it. Call your firm." She shook her head helplessly. "It's not that simple. The transfer's already processed. There are investors, deadlines." "I don't care about your investors," I snapped. "You took my life and put it up for sale." Something in her broke then. Her shoulders slumped. "You don't know what it's like," she whispered. "You had Dad. You had that house. I grew up watching you love him more than me. After he died, you stopped seeing me. Everything you did was for him. You kept that house like a shrine, but it was suffocating me." Her words struck deep, raw and cruel because they carried a piece of truth. "I wasn't trying to hurt you, Mom. I was trying to breathe again." We stood in silence. The distance between us felt impossible. I wanted to reach for her, to tell her I understood the loneliness she'd carried all these years, but I couldn't. Not when she'd burned down everything we built. The next morning, she was gone before sunrise. Only a note on the table. "I'm staying at the property for a few days. Please don't come." But I did. Because I couldn't let the story end there. When I arrived, the renovation site was quiet, no workers, no noise, just the hum of wind through unfinished walls. Her car was parked out front. I called out, "Claire?" No answer. I stepped inside, the floorboards dusty beneath my shoes. My cane tapped softly, each sound echoing like memory. Upstairs, I found her sitting in what used to be my bedroom, now stripped bare to the studs. She was on the floor, knees pulled to her chest, surrounded by boxes of old photos and letters she must have found in storage. She didn't look up when I entered. "I was going to throw them away," she said, voice shaking. But I couldn't. I lowered myself onto the floor beside her, knees aching. "Then don't." We sat there in silence for a long while, the dust catching light in the air like ghosts of the past. When she finally spoke again, her voice was small. "I thought if I tore it all down, maybe I could start over. But it just feels emptier." I nodded slowly. "You can't build peace on ashes, sweetheart. You have to make peace with them." She looked at me, tears streaking her face, and for the first time in years, I saw my little girl again, not the woman who'd betrayed me. But forgiveness wasn't simple. There were still lies to untangle, signatures to reverse, wounds to name. And yet, as we sat there surrounded by our ghosts, I realized something had already begun to shift. Sometimes, destruction isn't the end. Sometimes, it's the only way truth can find its way through the cracks. The silence between us stretched, heavy and trembling. Dust drifted in slow spirals through the sunlight pouring in from the half-boarded window. Claire sat with her back against the wall, eyes red, clutching one of the old photographs she'd pulled from a box. It was a picture of her as a little girl, missing her 2 front teeth, hair tangled, sitting on George's shoulders as they smiled at the camera. "He used to take me fishing every Saturday," she said softly. "I remember thinking he'd never grow old." I swallowed hard. "He adored you." Her voice cracked. "No, he adored you. He always said you were his North Star." She let out a shaky laugh. "Do you know what it's like to grow up hearing that your mother is someone's entire world and realizing you'll never be?" Her words cut through me, clean and cruel. I wanted to protest, to tell her she'd been loved too, but deep down I knew what she meant. I had loved her father like air itself, and after he died, I'd clung to his memory so tightly there'd been no space left for anyone else. "I thought keeping the house was how I kept him alive," I whispered. She looked at me, eyes glistening. "And I thought destroying it was how I could finally stop hurting." For a long time, neither of us spoke. The wind outside pressed against the boards like someone trying to get in. Finally, I reached for her hand. "You should have told me, Claire. You should have told me you felt that way." She flinched, tears spilling over. I tried. "Do you remember when I wanted to move to the city after college? You begged me to stay. Said your heart couldn't take another goodbye. I was scared," I admitted. "After your father died, every time you left the house, I was terrified I'd lose you too." Her hand tightened in mine. "You didn't lose me, Mom. You trapped me." The truth stung, but it was true. In trying to protect her, I'd built walls instead of bridges. She stood slowly, brushing dust off her jeans. "Do you know what finally made me do it? What made me sign those papers?" I shook my head. She walked to the corner of the room and picked up another photograph, one of George in his final days, frail and pale, sitting in that same room by the window. "I found this photo while packing. And I remembered the night he died, you sitting there, holding his hand, whispering to him that you'd never leave the house, that you'd keep it exactly as it was." Her eyes filled again. "You made that promise to a dying man, Mom. But it wasn't a promise, it was a prison sentence. For both of us." Her voice cracked open then, raw and shaking. I couldn't breathe in that house. Every wall, every smell, it was like living inside a tomb. I needed to escape. And when you got sick, I thought, maybe this was the universe's way of letting me end it, for both of us. She turned away, ashamed. But I went too far. I know that now. I couldn't speak. My throat burned with the weight of all the years I'd spent clinging to ghosts. For the first time, I saw my daughter not as the woman who betrayed me, but as the girl who'd grown up in the shadow of my grief. I took a slow breath, the air thick with dust and forgiveness. "You were right, you know," I said quietly. "That house had become a tomb. But I didn't see it until now. She looked at me, confused. I thought I was preserving love, I continued. But I was preserving pain. Keeping it polished, sacred, untouchable, as if letting it fade would mean I'd stopped loving him. But maybe love isn't meant to be preserved. Maybe it's meant to change shape. Her lip trembled. I'm so sorry, Mom. I reached up and touched her cheek, the same cheek I'd kissed 1,000 times when she was little. I am too. We spent the rest of that afternoon going through the boxes together, not as enemies, not as mother and daughter locked in grief, but as two women trying to rebuild something broken. There were old letters from George, faded recipes in my handwriting, school drawings of Claire's tucked between bills. Every artifact carried a piece of us, who we were, who we'd been too afraid to be. When the sun began to set, painting the bare walls gold, Claire turned to me. What do you want me to do? I thought for a moment. I don't want you to sell it. Not yet. Let's finish it together. Make it something new, something that belongs to both of us. She frowned softly. Are you sure? I nodded. If we tear it down, let it be because we chose it, not because we were running from ghosts. For the first time in years, I saw her smile. Not the polite smile she gave to clients or neighbors, but a real one, unguarded, fragile, hopeful. Okay, she whispered. Together. That night, I stayed in the house for the first time in months. There was no electricity yet, only candlelight flickering against bare beams. I lay on a makeshift bed, an old blanket and a pillow, listening to the wind move through the open window frames. And for the first time, the silence didn't hurt. It felt alive. Healing. I thought of George, of how he'd always said Claire had his eyes. You'll see the world through those one day, he'd told her once. He'd been right. Through her eyes, I was finally seeing life again, not through the past, but through what could still be built. But healing isn't a straight line. A few days later, I woke to find Claire standing outside by the old oak stump, her phone pressed to her ear. Her voice was low, tense. I don't know, she said. They're pulling the offer if we don't sign this week. A chill ran through me. The investors. The sale. When she noticed me watching from the window, she hung up quickly. We didn't speak of it all morning. Finally, over coffee, I said, if you need the money, Claire, just tell me. Her shoulders stiffened. It's not just the money. It's everything. The job. The deadlines. I promised them I'd close the deal. I set my mug down gently. And what about your promise to me? Her eyes filled again, torn between guilt and fear. I don't know what to do anymore. I took her hand. Then do what's right. Not what's easy. She stared at me for a long moment, then nodded slowly, the kind of nod that carries a decision heavy enough to change the course of a life. The next morning, she made the call. I sat beside her as she told the firm she was backing out. Her voice trembled, but she didn't falter. When she hung up, she exhaled deeply, almost in relief. They're furious, she said with a faint, broken laugh. I might lose my job. I squeezed her hand. Maybe. But you won't lose your soul. We sat there in quiet triumph, both exhausted, both lighter somehow. Later that evening, Jacob came running in from the car, clutching a small drawing in his hand. Grandma, look, he said, waving it proudly. It was the house again, but this time, no storm clouds, no flames. Just sunlight and flowers blooming around it. And in front, 3 stick figures, him, Claire, and me, holding hands. I felt tears spill freely down my cheeks. It's beautiful, sweetheart. He smiled. Mom says we're going to make it new. I looked at Claire, who nodded, eyes glistening. We are. That night, as the moonlight spilled through the unfinished rafters, I whispered a quiet goodbye to George. Not to forget him, but to finally let him rest. And in the echo of that silence, I heard something new rising between us, not the past we lost, but the love we still had the power to rebuild. The winter came softly that year. By November, the skeleton of the house on Willow Lane had begun to take shape again, not as it once was, but as something new. The beams were reinforced, the walls smooth and bright. Where there had once been decay, now there was promise. Claire oversaw the contractors herself, clipboard in hand, hair tied back, her old sharpness replaced by quiet determination. Sometimes I'd sit on the porch steps wrapped in a shawl, watching her give directions, and I'd think how much of her father lived in her after all. The same focus, the same stubborn tilt of the jaw when she meant business. Jacob would run around the yard, pretending to be the boss of the builders, his small boots stamping over the cold earth that once held my rose bushes. He'd ask me about everything: what color the kitchen used to be, how many pancakes Grandpa could eat, why I kept so many teacups. And every time, I told him the stories. Because stories were the one thing Claire hadn't taken from me, and now, she wanted them back. The first real snow came on a Sunday morning. I remember the silence of it, the world hushed under a white blanket, every sound softened. Claire was inside, kneeling on the floor, painting a wooden cabinet pale blue, the same shade we'd had when she was a child. "I thought we could use some of the old colors," she said when she saw me watching. I smiled. "George would approve." She paused mid-brushstroke. "Do you still talk to him? In your head, I mean?" I nodded. "All the time. He doesn't answer much these days, though. Maybe because I finally learned to listen without him." Her eyes softened, and she smiled, not sadly this time, but with something gentler. "I think he'd be proud of you." I looked around the room, the half-finished kitchen, the smell of wood and new beginnings. "Of us," I said quietly. It took months, but by spring the renovation was done. The final walkthrough felt surreal, as if we were stepping into both memory and rebirth at once. The old fireplace was still there, but Claire had tiled it in soft cream stone. The window seat where I used to read had been rebuilt, wider now, so Jacob could sit beside me. In the hallway, she'd hung a row of frames. Not just the old ones, but new photos too, the three of us together, smiling in hard hats during construction. "I wanted it to feel like everyone's house," she said. I reached out and touched one of the frames, a photo of me and her from last summer, laughing mid-argument about wallpaper colors. "It does," I whispered. The first night we spent there together was quiet. No TV, no distractions, just the three of us and the soft hum of the house settling. After Jacob went to bed, Claire poured us both a glass of wine. We sat by the window, watching the stars through the clean glass. "Do you ever think about what might have happened if we hadn't gone through all this?" she asked. "All the time," I said. "But then I remember, sometimes you have to lose something to learn what it really meant." She looked at me thoughtfully. "I used to think I was saving you. But I think maybe you were saving me all along." I smiled faintly. "We were just trying to love each other the only way we knew how." She leaned her head on my shoulder. For the first time in a long, long while, it felt like we were both home. Weeks passed, then months. Life settled into something simple and ordinary, the kind of rhythm you only appreciate after chaos. Claire kept her job, but worked fewer hours. Jacob started drawing again, not storm clouds or burning houses this time, but bright suns and gardens. And I started writing. At first, it was just notes, small reflections on love, loss, the strange shape of forgiveness. Then pages. Then whole days lost to memory and ink. Writing, I realized, was another kind of renovation, one done in the quiet rooms of the soul. One afternoon, I showed Claire a page from my notebook. She read it silently, then looked up, her eyes glassy. "Mom," she said softly, "you should publish this." I laughed. "Oh, I don't think the world needs another old woman's diary." She smiled. "Maybe it does." That summer, we planted a new garden together right where the old one had been. Jacob chose the seeds, daisies, marigolds, and one stubborn little rosebush that refused to bloom for weeks. But when it finally did, a single pale pink flower in late August, Claire cried. "I didn't think it would take," she said. "It just needed time," I whispered. She looked at me, understanding flickering in her eyes. "Like us." I nodded. "Exactly like us. It's strange, the way grief reshapes itself over the years. It doesn't disappear, it just changes flavor, from sharp to bittersweet, from unbearable to gentle. Sometimes I still wake up expecting to hear George's voice calling me from the kitchen. Sometimes I walk through the hall and think I see him at the end of it, tall, smiling, half-turned toward me. But it doesn't hurt anymore. Now, when I see him in my mind, he's not waiting for me to follow, he's waving goodbye, content. Because he knows I finally let him rest. Last week, I caught Jacob sitting at the window seat, sketching. He didn't notice me watching at first. When I asked what he was drawing, he turned the page toward me. It was the house again, but now, it wasn't just ours. In the background, he'd drawn other homes, other people, trees, sunlight. It's the neighborhood, he said proudly. Because we're part of it now. I kissed his forehead. Yes, sweetheart. We are. And for the first time, I understood what home really meant. It wasn't walls or furniture or signatures on a deed. It was the place where forgiveness took root, where the past stopped haunting and started teaching. Tonight, as I sit by the window with the lamp glowing softly beside me, I can hear laughter from the kitchen, Claire and Jacob baking cookies, arguing about chocolate chips. The house smells like sugar and warmth. I think of that night long ago, Jacob's frightened whisper, "Grandma, please don't go back home." And I smile. He was right, in a way. I didn't go back home. I built a new one, with the same walls, the same memories, but a different heart. This one breathes. This one forgives. I pick up my pen and write one last line in my notebook, for George, for Claire, for the house that refused to die. Love isn't what you keep, it's what you build again, even after it's broken. And when I close the book, I realize something simple, something true. I am no longer afraid to go home.